Hey everyone, it's time for video games! I've been doing a lot of work with getting the last of those aprons out, thank God it's all done, under the hood stuff for YouTube like organizing receipts, and talking about all the cool video games that have came out in the last year, but it's time to play something and have ourselves a ball doing it. And what better way to break the lack of video game slump than with some good old immersive sim sneaky shooties. So the other day I opened Twitter and saw that Hyperstrange had messaged me with a key for Blood West's new DLC, Dead Man's Promise. Well, I finally got around to redeeming that key and played the hell out of it. Dead Man's Promise is a standalone story set within Blood West's greater universe, which, in case you didn't know about Blood West, it's a game where you play a cursed undead cowboy that has to cleanse the land of evil. Lots of sneaking around, finding trinkets, and killing forces beyond your comprehension will ensue. In Dead Man's Promise, you play as a different unfortunate soul who's condemned to eternal life than the one in the main game, who is tasked by forces beyond their understanding to go out and kill another force beyond their understanding if they ever want to know peace. There are new weapons, there are new trinkets, there are new forms of pain. Like, goddamn, I am an experienced sneaky yeehaw man, and this game beat the crap out of me. Let's get into detail though. Welcome to the spooky swamps. The other spooky swamps. This area reminds me a bit of the bogs in Act 2 in the base game, but it's certainly a wholly different map. It's about the size of any other of the 3 maps in the base game, and there's plenty of verticality in places like the mines and the caves where all the people eaters hang out. There's a lot of water and a lot of things in the water too, so be careful. On the note of that verticality, Dead Man's Promise adds a new layer to the survival in the form of threats from above. You didn't see too much of that in the base game, but now you gotta occasionally watch the tree lines and ledges for stuff that's gonna try jumping out at you or take pot shots at you from a ledge. Secrets and other things you want to snag are also sometimes in high up places or just... I am among the many that took a lot longer than I'd like to admit trying to find a certain key, but I found it eventually. Just know it's there and that there are several different places where this key can be hidden. Secrets and other things you want to snag are sometimes in higher places, and it's nice when a game tries to teach you to look up. You just don't do much of that. Usually you're the one that's above. Something that's a little more story than gameplay in relation to this map is that the area is implied to be near the Barren Lands, which is presumably the first act of the main game, but not so near that it's the same climate or biome. Thinking back, we don't know exactly how far the condemned cowboy had to travel from the Barren Lands to the swamps in Act 2. I think we were just summoned there. We know that the cowboy and the skeleton friend were able to get from the swamps to the mountains on foot in a reasonable amount of time though. On that note, the story is completely removed from the events of the main game. We don't see the totem or the skeleton friend, although his voice actor is playing like half the voice cast here. On that note, there is a lot of new stuff in Dead Man's Promise, among which are a ton of voice-acted characters. You'd usually just get the totem and maybe 1 or 2 NPC vendors per area in the base game, but now, thanks to the protagonist's ability to speak with the dead, you get half a dozen spirits to converse with on top of your handler and the 2 vendors in the game. There's a lot to glean about this part of the world through conversations with the dead, and if you want to get the cool gun at the end of the game, you're gonna need to help them resolve their issues and move on. There's quite a few side quests in the spooky swamps, ranging from finding some guy's skin to entering the spooky dimension and finding the cursed chalice, which can theoretically bring someone back to life. Better check the label on that thing before you hand it over to the guy. Then there's new weapons and trinkets added into Dead Man's Promise, which mostly center around the player character and his handler's brand of occultism. There's things like the blowgun, which I gave an honest try, but I didn't end up liking it that much. And then there's stuff like the magical staff, which I loved. I mained the Raven Skull staff as soon as I got it, because having a projectile weapon that doesn't need ammo, but also hits like a truck in melee is amazing. There's also designated trinkets for all the spooky stuff, like the spooky hat, which is a trend among all the new stuff and just a general thing in Blood West. There are a lot of synergizing weapon and trinket sets, and a whole build's worth of stuff around the voodoo doll, using a staff, or even your bare hands. I really wanted to find an excuse to use these, but by the time I got them, I was already locked into the Raven staff just before getting my endgame weapon. Oh yeah, also now that Blood West is a Newblood game, there is an obligatory Newblood game reference weapon somewhere in the DLC. Lastly, the skill tree has been reworked for the new player character, but there's not all that much that's groundbreaking here. Just things that are similar to the base game, but in a bit more of a tailored fashion to our new guy. The one thing I noticed the most is the modification to the sneaking skill that not only increases your sneak ability, but also gives you a bunch of water-related buffs, such as a faster sneak speed in water, HP regen in water, and every time you kill someone in the water, you get a good chunk of your HP back on top of your regen. This is actually a very useful skill, as there is a lot of water in the map, and it's only you that has to be in the water for the buff to work, not the other guy. So you can basically just hide in the water from the swamps and take out guys on land and basically be invincible as long as you play your cards right. Another skill buff you can choose is an ability that lets you collect more soul residue and collect it from farther away, which is a good time to bring up that there is a whole new currency in Dead Man's Promise. Your handler, Miss Maria Espinosa, will sell you magical items that are fairly powerful on top of all the stuff a sneaky undead man needs. However, she has no need for mortal dollars. She wants souls. How do you get soul residue, or murder bucks as I call them? Murder! Now, when enemies die, there's going to be little blue lights around them for a brief moment, which if you hang out near them, you'll absorb it. You can get some pretty good stuff from soul residue, but it comes with a catch. You gotta be close to dead enemies to get their soul residue, which heavily disincentivizes sniping or otherwise slowly picking off enemies from a safe distance. You're gonna be seeing a good number of both new and familiar enemies in the DLC. Guys like the Forest Ghouls from Act 2, the Prospectors, the Slug guys, among others, are back, and there's also new guys like the Spitters that you first saw in Act 1 have evolved to have armored shells and huge blades on their arm and are now a major threat in the early game. And there's a new version of the Slug cultists that just straight up shoot fire, like a lot of fire. They hurl fireballs and have a flamethrower. That flamethrower will kill you dead inside of like a second. Then there's hair guys who hang around the portals to the spooky zones, the big guys, and these horrible little twerps that hide in the trees and jump down on you from out of nowhere. Keep an eye on your detection meter even if you don't immediately see anyone around you. It's likely these little shits are in the trees. What's really gonna get you though is not the enemies, as a good number of them are familiar, but the enemy placement. It's not some Scholar of the First Sin crap, it's enemies placed in a way that synergize with each other in the environment and make all the fights really tough. This DLC is hard. Like that warning you get before you start it isn't playing around. This is for experienced cowpokes only. I died more in the first couple hours of this DLC than in my entire run of the main game for that video. The game starts you in a spot that you think is good at first, but in reality puts you at the bottom of a long hill you gotta climb. You start with two melee weapons, one that gives you a considerable bonus to stealth attacks, and the other is literally a stab stick. The stab stick is rather slow and takes 3 or 4 hits to take down your average enemy so long as you're aiming for the face, who in turn will take you down in 2 or 3. The knife is good, but you have to be really good with your sneaking about and learning how each enemy moves and their patrol patterns if you want to use it effectively. I initially thought this game was being overly generous by starting me out with a gold coin to negate any soul flaws on my first death and a bottle of purple revival, which will remove all soul flaws and bound items once you drink it, no matter how many soul flaws you have. But I burned through that stuff in the first half hour. The new enemies are tough, especially those armored spitter slasher guys in the early game. But don't forget about the older enemies. I swear the spectral cowboys have been buffed to high heaven, because even with using silver munitions in my traditional weapons, or weapons that just do extra damage to spectral enemies, they can soak up a ton of damage while dishing out a crap load of damage to you. The leech guys also feel like they've gotten a lot more accurate with the leeches they fling at you, but it's still dodgeable if you're fast or use the environment to your advantage. Across the board now, you really feel how all the enemies in this game are going to hit you like a truck until you get some proper means of dealing with them. Enemies that I previously never so much had taken damage from in the base game very nearly got me thanks to smart placement. You will get put in bad spots. You will find out the hard way that you do not have the same advantages afforded to you in the base game versus now. You will die a lot. I am not kidding about all those deaths early on. I got more soul flaws and debuffs in this run of the DLC than in all my other runs of the base game combined. I ended up selling all the potions I found in my first hour of play to just barely afford a sawed-off shotgun and a few shells from the first vendor that takes dollars instead of murder bucks, since I wasn't very good at collecting the murder bucks thanks to not being able to kill anything consistently. You never really appreciate the damage output of the most basic guns in this game, like the revolver or that sawed-off, until you've gone hours without them. You'll eventually climb into that big hole of debuffs you dig yourself and find stuff like the Raven Staff or the bare hands or the endgame weapon of your choice, but you're never gonna feel as strong as you were in the base game. Time for a cooking segment. I honest to goodness didn't think I was going to be able to find the time to squeeze one in, but then I had an idea, or perhaps an impulse. You see, I don't so much as get inspired to cook something as I do get an intrusive thought for a recipe. The other day I was at the restaurant supply store to pick up some spices and coffee syrup, and they just happened to have a retailer-sized package of GANSITOs just sitting there at less than 50 cents a cake. I put them in the freezer, as you do, and I've been snacking like a king since then. Then I remembered that when snack cakes are cold, they're easier to fry thanks to not overcooking the insides, and thought, you know, I could try battering and frying these suckers like they're Twinkies. And what you're about to see is the first time I tried any of this. I'm not kidding. I'm making this up after I went to a trip to the store to get what I thought I needed. The first step in this is to acquire GANSITOs, which are a Mexican snack cake with a cream and strawberry filling covered with a chocolate shell and sprinkles. They're pretty rad. Freeze them overnight if you don't have them already chilled, and then the next day we're gonna get a batter in. So what we're gonna do here is get a box of instant pancake mix or funnel cake mix if they've got that at your store, and sift it into a bowl. I honestly don't know if sifting makes it any better for this scenario. We add water as we need until we get a thick mixture, and I mean thick. This needs to completely and thickly coat the mixing spoon when we pull it out, because we need to have it thoroughly coat out our GANSITOs for frying. Then just go the extra mile and take a thing of chocolate chips and mix that into the batter too. Now finally, you might have noticed that GANSITOs are oblong snacks, and it wouldn't be very efficient to dunk them in a bowl like this. So what we're gonna do is transfer the mixed batter into a pitcher like this one I got here, so that dunking is easy and efficient. Finally, unwrap as many GANSITOs as we're gonna fry up, and then skewer them with plain old skewer sticks like this one. Don't worry about the excess length, it's going to come in handy later. Frying time. Now we're gonna want to use a taller pot like this one and only fill it halfway up at most, because not only do we need to account for the displacement of the battered and fried GANSITOs, but also remember that things expand when they're heated up. And remember to always have a means of instantly snuffing out any fire that might arise, like the lid of the pot you're using, or like I've got right here, or a fire extinguisher rated to take out grease fires, like the one I've got just off camera. Make sure your oil thermometer is in a spot where it's in the oil and easy to read at a glance, and turn the heat on. We're gonna get this up to 350 degrees of freedom heat units. As always, never leave oil that's being heated unattended. Once it's good and hot, we're gonna slowly dunk our GANSITOs into the batter pitcher, and then let it hang over the top for a bit of the pitcher, just to let the excess globs drip off, because it's better to have that drip back into the pitcher than it is to drip into the oil and cause it to splash. Now slowly, carefully lower one GANSITO on a stick at a time into the oil, and gently hold it in there, rotating slowly to get an even golden brown color. This is going to take a single minute at most. These cook fast. Once they're done, put them on a wire rack to cool, and do the next one until you're done. Once you're done, turn the heat off the oil, move it away from the heat source, and put a lid or cover over it. We are not going to do anything with this until it is cooled back down to room temp, and then we will properly dispose of it. In the meantime, we're gonna top up our now fried GANSITOs. GANSITOs have cream and strawberry filling on the inside, so we're just gonna put that on the outside. Squeeze some strawberry jam over the top of the flattest side of your fried GANSITO. If you can find them, get one of those squeeze bottles of strawberry jam with a wide opening, because they're great for this, and then just squeeze it right over the top. Now finally, we're gonna take some of that whipped cream we still have left over from Costco pumpkin pie season and blast it over the top of that jam, and finally, we're gonna cover that whipped cream in chocolate sprinkles just like the top of a normal GANSITO. This is a glorious success, and I will be acting on all my intrusive thoughts and impulses going forward. Oh yeah, and before I forget, you're probably going to have a ton of batter left over by the method that we got everything coated. And conveniently, most pitchers like this do have a lid. Just put a lid on the pitcher of excess batter, and that's perfect for making chocolate chip pancakes for the next couple days. As long as you keep it in the fridge, batter should last a good day or so after you mix it. It's great, and I don't know why I don't do this more often. Let's get back to Dead Man's Promise now. There is a story here adjacent to the main game, and there will be some spoiler stuff later on, but for now we can go over the basics, and I will get into the spoilers and other gameplay elements I cannot talk about without spoiling plot details later. Don't worry, as always you will get a warning. The premise of Dead Man's Promise has you playing as the father of Twen, a little girl we met in Act 2 of the base game who left Twen to her own devices when the evil consuming the land made it into the swamps. He did this to try and save her though. He went out using his occult connections to go find someone that can help him, and in the interim, the player character of the main game showed up. Twen's father is a competent magician in his own right, and was able to contact and make a pact with a force beyond our normal understanding, which for all intents and purposes is death itself. The pact isn't straightforward though, and we've been running errands for death for a bit now, and you awaken in a swamp not unlike the one you left, where according to your handler, Miss Maria Espinosa, an entity is causing irreparable damage to your mutual employer. Maria's a shrewd businesswoman herself, and on top of buying useful tools of spooky violence offer, she'll occasionally have an offer for you to make a nice chunk of murder bucks by bringing her an artifact or two. Irreparable damage seems to be no exaggeration, as it would seem that the dead just aren't dying around here, and those intact enough to still have a semblance of a soul are still bound to the earth with unfinished business. That's where Mr. Twen's dad and his occult talents come in. He's what you call a spirit talker, and he can not only see spirits who have not passed on, but can communicate with them as easily as talking to a member of the living. Not all of them have quests you can completely resolve, but most of them will have something you can do to help them move on, or at least prevent more hardship in the afterlife. The first one you meet is the last scion of a monster hunting family, who also puts in motion the quest to go get something extra spicy to deal with this interloper upon death. Okay, time for spoilery stuff. You know what to do if you don't wanna. So eventually, after you get your ass handed to you many times against new and buffed older enemies, all signs eventually point to the mysterious mine in the swamps that just generally seems out of place. There are no rail lines connecting it to anywhere in order to bring the raw materials to where they can be processed, and for that matter, despite how deep these mines go, there's not really any ore or malleable materials being extracted. You know what's coming out of the mine? Blood. At the very bottom of the mine, there is a cavernous space that leads to a small altar that has an energy about it. There's been a smatterings of rifts in reality where you will go to a strange place with overtly devilish entities, albeit ones that are CR0. While these guys make you act with caution, they never killed me or even put me in danger, making them the easiest enemy in the game. We learned through talking to a restless spirit of one of the leech cultists that if we collect some spooky shards in the mines and inside some of the rifts, we'll be able to open up a portal to the big one. We do that, but not before doing the side quest to get the demon killing weapon of our choice. Once you have the key ingredients, you can use any weapon kit you find to make your demon killing weapon of preference. I found the stuff for a spear, a lever action rifle, and a shotgun. I went with the shotgun and it hits like a freight train. We confront the big bad, and with that, our contract is completed and we are set free with our mortality return. It turns out that our contract was entirely incidental to Death's machinations, and we were kept along because as a spirit talker, we're pretty handy for making sure the dead are put to rest. Twen ended up guaranteeing not only our own safety, but hers as well, because when she prayed to Death, Death listened and sent the protagonist of the main game in her general direction, which guaranteed her safety. That's got some potentially interesting implications with the main story, as when that's happening, we're brought to Twen's swamp by the Totem of Souls. So either Death has a vested interest in the machinations of the Totem of Souls, or perhaps has a supreme mastery of causality, which, I could see because death is inevitable after all. Things end with us no longer having the glowing eyes of an undead and heading off to reunite with Twen. So now that we're in spoilers, I can now say that despite how crushingly hard the main game of this DLC is, the boss fight at the end is easy. Like, the easiest boss fight in the entire game so far. It's fairly straightforward, the attacks are easy to read and easier to dodge, the room hazards are never further than 1/2 of a stamina's bar worth of sprinting to deactivate. Oh, and you get a gun stronger than pretty much anything you had in the base game. I first tried this boss and didn't even need to use any buffing potions before going in. So now that we're at the end, I can say that Dead Man's Promise is very much for experienced Yeehaw shooters only, and even then, don't expect to have an easy time even if you played the base game recently. This is basically Kaizo Blood West, and it does not forgive even the slightest screw-ups. Something I find interesting is that the DLC option on the main menu takes you to a sub-menu where you manually select Dead Man's Promise. Based on how this entire DLC is based off a couple throwaway lines in Act 2, I could potentially see more DLCs happening thanks to Newblood's publishing involvement. Who knows? Maybe if enough of us buy Dead Man's Promise, it'll be enough for more stories within Blood West in the form of DLC, or even a Blood West 2 to be a thing. We gotta actually buy this DLC if we want that to happen though, and by the way, don't fret about playtime. This took me just under 7 hours to get through, and that's as someone who is experienced with the base game. So plenty of value there. I'll warn you again though, it's tough. Like tough. So bring your strongest yeehaws. So as for what's coming up next, I have already gotten access to Parapedia despite it not coming out until late next month, but I'm gonna make other videos in between, which you guys will see, because I don't want to have the video for Parapedia come out far away from the launch date and not hit the hype window. Plus, as you are watching this, I'm actually at MagFest right now, so I can't exactly play video games while I am experiencing peak video games in real life. I might take advantage of the interlude between sobering up from MagFest and Para's release to maybe try and tackle some of the releases I missed in 2024, or do more prep work for Halloween in July. Oh yeah, I gotta try out that streaming thing too. As always, don't forget to subscribe here and follow me on Blue Sky or Twitter, whichever you prefer. I'm kind of on both now. And if you really like me and want to support what I do here, I run a Patreon with lots of benefits, and anything you can throw my way is greatly appreciated. That's all for now though. Let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it painting, sculpting clay, or 3D modeling, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a word that has been twisted into meaning a means to grind up all your skills, aspirations, and passions into a gray sludge meant for nothing more than to make a line go up for someone else's benefit. Your art in no way deserves that. Your art is inalienably a reflection of you by the very nature of its creation, and in no way do you deserve that. Art is sacred and art is worth fighting for. So get out there and fight for your art by fighting against the contentification of everything. Stay saucy. Oh boy. I'm back from the gym, and my backpack is... Oh, did you get your claw stuck? Sir, just hold still. I will get it. Shh. There you are. You were so excited to rub up against the backpack that you got stuck. You were screaming and rubbing all over it because you insisted on being pet, and now that you got embarrassed because you got stuck, you're like, oh, no, I wasn't. Don't lie. I know you're always excited to see me. And now he's playing it cool. I swear to God, you were basically a teenager, a moody little teenager. You totally weren't rubbing up against all the stupid little pins I have. Like, look at all this crap on my backpack. Look at this saucy boy. Whoop. Whoop. That's right. I accidentally caught you in an embarrassing moment. And now you're trying to pretend you're too cool for this. Even though you were just all over the backpack getting smells. Dude, I love this. This one, the World of War one, you can get on Fangamer. I love it. And this was this year's MagFest, which spins! Do you spin? Are you a spinny boy? Don't worry, I'm not going to spin you. That'd be rude.